And so we moved from those massive, great ocean liners carrying so many people across the oceans, and that wave of tourism that began with that. And we scaled that down to these small personal powerboats for playing mostly closer to home, in a summer vacation sort of concept. And it really had to do with the changing of the technology that was allowing these to be affordable for the individual. So for the first small steamboats, the first small powerboats that were built, these were still these steam engines. So in the 1880s, people were experimenting on the lakes and rivers, and sheltered bays, I'm sure too. And it wasn't until the early 1900s that the more reliable technology for internal combustion engines was developed, so they wouldn't blow up. And then with these small boats, as they were evolving into powerboats, one of the more famous companies is the Chris-Craft boats, and you can see the advertisement for them on the left. So just to look at some of the development of what was happening. So as these powerboat engines and how they were configured was arranged, and they became slightly safer. At any point where there's two boats going in the same direction at the same time, it's suddenly a race. And so powerboat racing started to push the development itself of making these boats faster and faster. So in 1903, they began a so-called international, because it was held in Ireland, the Harmsworth Cup. And the first winner of that race was Dorothy Levitt, seen here on the right, in a boat called the Napier. So on our side of the Atlantic, the American John Hacker was acknowledged as a builder of the fastest boats in the world. So he, working out in New York, upstate on one of the lakes, in 1911 developed one of the first hydroplanes called the Kitty Hawk, and it was able to go 50 miles an hour, which was at that point was unheard of. And so as this technology was advancing and people were playing in these small boats in New Hampshire on the lakes over in Winnipesaukee, again the start of those ideas of how to have fun in the summer, boat races were started in the 1920s, about 1926. And since then they have continued. And you'll see in the small clip of the New Hampshire Boat and Motoring Company out on the lake, since the 1960s, that company has been restoring those old boats and taking them out to show them off in festivals. And so we come to the last topic of our class. It's very near and dear to my own heart. I do really enjoy sailing. Anytime I can get out on the water is a good day. So in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the yacht club used to sit right where the bridge now goes over to Pierce Island from in that Strawberry Bank area. And you can see the picture on the far left of it's a shot from the 1930s. The club was started back in the 1890s. And there's a small catboat out the front, and there's a couple power boats that can be seen in a different angle from another shot. And then on the bottom in the middle, the catboats racing out on the bay. So the other yacht clubs in the area include Kittery Point and Great Bay Yacht Clubs, and these are all ways for people to get together and race smaller boats. So again, at this point in the century, this idea of racing no longer just being a rich person's sport with these massive yachts that needed so much technical support and funding to be able to continue with. These were small boats raced against each other in a fairly casual setting. And as mass production improved and technology increased the abilities of these small boats, they became more and more affordable. So on the flip side of that, if you look back to the heyday of racing, it's amazing how the concepts of being out on the water have changed. So at first, most times going to sea, it was for work. So it was for fishing, or it was for the necessity of getting from one side of the Atlantic to the other as an immigrant. And you weren't likely to want to stay out there in the storms and the insanity that could occur. And so the quote there at the top is, the person that would go to sea for pleasure would go to hell for a pastime. And yet in this era, the heyday in 1920s of yacht racing, it was obvious that so many people had taken up the sport of getting out on the water. So the America's Cup was initially won in 1856. The boat America went over from the New York Yacht Club to Cowes in the south of England. And the race itself was around the island, the Isle of Wight, the Queen in attendance, etc., etc. And during the race, the shape of the hull itself, so this was styled after the pilot boats in America, and it so outdistanced the British ships or yachts that were in the race that it turned the point of the island in time before the tide changed, and it swept along that side of the island before any other boat had taken the corner. And so when it crossed the finish line, there was literally no one in sight behind it. And so when the Queen asked who's second, realizing that the Americans had won, the Rear Admiral standing beside her said, "Ma'am, Your Highness, there is no second." And so goes the legend. The America, they attempted to conserve it and kept it at Annapolis at the naval training station there, and unfortunately, I think it was World War II, the roof of the shed it was in collapsed under a heavy snowfall and it was crushed. So everything that you've seen since then that says that it is the America boat, it's actually the replicas of it. I worked on one down in Key West, and they're extremely fun to sail. So that America's Cup, the cup itself, the trophy that was won, returned to America, and it was an honor that was held on to for over 100 years, and they continued to successfully defeat it with boats such as you see on the right there, the Resolute. And so these amazing yachts and their designers created different shapes and forms and pushed against the rules of racing to make things faster and faster, changing those designs. So what you see now for sailboats is basically descendants of those, and within, you know, what could be considered affordable. And with, as I was saying, mass production, they continue to be things that, you know, you could afford as opposed to the Resolute here. So by the 1960s and 70s, these wooden forms had switched mainly over to fiberglass, again increasing that ability of middle class to buy them. So if you have any want for a sailboat, go out and get one. In conclusion, for this lecture, we looked at that shift from going out on the water only for working to these concepts of going for leisure, for tourism, going to see the world in these massive ocean liners, and the fact that so many of those small powerboats that started out as steam, with the advancing technology, that shifted to internal combustion engines in the early 1900s. And with any two boats going in the same direction, it being a race, yacht clubs were, part of their creation was to be able to organize racing, and sailing boats continue as something that's popular, or as a hobby to get people out on the water. So that concludes our lecture sections. I hope you've enjoyed the class. Please let me know in assessments anything that you can see for improving the class. It'd be greatly appreciated, and I look forward to seeing your final reports on ships and wrecks. Thanks again.